Welcome to the Making Sense of Martech podcast, where we interview leaders and put them in the hot seat. I'm Jacqueline Friedman, founder of Monarch and global head of advisory for the Martech Weekly. Let's dive in and meet Jason Lyman, the chief marketing officer of Customer.io. A little bit about him. He has over a decade of SaaS marketing leadership at Dropbox, BetterCloud, and Microsoft. He now leads the Customer.io team, and he's focused on strategic customer-centric growth across both product-led and enterprise sales motions. And I've done that in my past. It is not easy. It's a very hard thing to deal with. So thank you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to start us off, we'll begin with a few very quick questions to just kind of rapid fire, get to know you. What was your first Martech tool you ever used?
I'm actually going to go with a little bit of a non-traditional answer here because I actually didn't start my career in marketing. So I actually started as a strategy consultant. And so I spent my life working in Microsoft PowerPoint. And so I think I'm going to claim that as my first Martech tool because as a consultant, a lot of what you're doing is storytelling, and that's what marketers do. And the way that we did that was by building, honestly, hundreds of slides, thousands of slides to really convince clients that the analysis and the recommendations that we were proposing were the right ones. And this is, I think, very similar to how marketers develop a value prop. They build campaigns. They want to communicate that value in hopes that customers will purchase their solution. That's kind of where I really developed my love of storytelling and kind of used that as the kind of inflection point to decide, I want to kind of move into marketing. And so I went to grad school and used that to transition into, the tech marketing space.
Nice. I love that answer because truthfully, if you can't present and outline, describe what you're wanting to accomplish, you've already failed marketing 101. So it's unusual, but I like it.
Awesome.
What is one Martech brand right now that's living rent-free in your head?
I'd probably have to say Mixpanel. And I think they did a really, really good rebrand about 2 years ago that I can't kind of stop thinking about. I thought it really kind of elevated the experience that they offered to their target audience. I thought that the experience they provide to kind of engage with their brand and kind of get started with them through their PLG experience and kind of how the brand augmented the product experience was something that really stood out to me. I think it definitely changed my perceptions around the brand. So now I kind of think about Mixpanel as being more sophisticated than maybe some of the other analytics tools out there.
Ooh, okay. Good to know. And this one is a little bit spicier because we're going to delve into it later. But who is the Mark Benioff of this era?
So I'm going to be a little biased here, but I was lucky enough to work with Yamini Rangan when she was at Dropbox. So I've kind of seen how she works and how she likes to lead her teams firsthand. And I was really excited to see that she kind of took on the CEO role at HubSpot. And for the last few years, I think she's done an amazing job kind of leading a really broad organization that, has really embraced the role that AI can have in kind of defining how marketing and sales works. And so I think she was the one that kind of came top of mind for me first.
Yeah, she's a great one. Would love an intro. If there was one marketing myth you wish CEOs would retire, what is it?
I think given that I lead the marketing team at Customer.io, the first one that came to mind was email is dead. I think the reality is that email is still one of the most effective marketing channels that marketers use today. People who say this, I feel like, are probably the ones that are pushing out that generic kind of spammy content that honestly isn't going to work on any channel. But we all know that if email is personalized and timely, it can deliver strong ROI. And for the vast majority of marketers, it's a key piece of their overall integrated campaigns and lifecycle efforts. So that was the one that stood out to me.
I wholeheartedly agree. And this is a question we ask everyone. Who is someone you admire, whether it's professional or personal?
I really love sports. That's kind of one of my hobbies. So I think my natural inclination was I'm going to pick an athlete. And I lived in the Bay Area for over 10 years. And so one athlete I really admire is Steph Curry. And a few reasons why he kind of stands out to me is that one, he started out as an underdog and he didn't let that deter his goals. So, he didn't go to a big name, kind of blue blood, NCAA program. He went to this small little school called Davidson and that didn't deter him. I lived when he was kind of fighting through a bunch of ankle injuries. And so people weren't really sure if he was going to stick or not. Also, too, I feel like he understands what makes him unique and was really committed to honing that competitive advantage. So, he's known for being a long range shooter, but his routine, his investment in repetition, his ability to understand that and then add these elements like moving without the ball just really stands out to me as someone who is thinking about kind of the role they can play more holistically. And then finally, I just admire how he leads the team. He does it with joy and humility and confidence. And, he was willing to share the spotlight when KD came over for their championship run. He understands that if he elevates his teammates, it's going to be better for the broader success of the Warriors. And so I think these are all characteristics that I really admire, and I think they're applicable in how I like to work, and it really kind of influences how I like to lead my teams.
I love that answer. And this is a special one because we have to ask, last but not least, I hear you have a very, very long held tradition. So what is this week's grilled cheese recipe, and what day of the week do you do it?
It is true. I've eaten a grilled cheese sandwich pretty much every week for more than 25 years. And it's usually on Sundays for lunch. Kind of my go-to ingredients are Grandma Sycamore's bread. It's like a regional bread that you can get in the Mountain West. And I like medium Tillamook cheddar cheese. Those are kind of the two important components. Obviously, I've done this for a long time, so I've experimented with various different types of cheeses and breads and adding proteins. And I've kind of just decided this is what I like. This is what I enjoy. I know it's nothing fancy, but it really works for me.
Nothing beats a grilled cheese, and then the addition sometimes of a tomato soup.
It's always a plus in the wintertime.
Exactly. All right, let's dive into the topic we're going to be talking about. But first, let's hear a little bit about your experience at Dropbox, BetterCloud, Microsoft. Like, how did those shape how you see brand storytelling and how that applies as a philosophy today too?
Yeah, one of the core principles that I kind of share with my teams on a regular basis is I believe that best-in-class marketing is customer-centric, metrics-driven, and strategically aligned. And so if you want your storytelling to break through, it needs to have these components. And I can honestly say that my time at these companies kind of built my conviction around this point of view. So the first piece of it was being customer-centric. And when I was at Dropbox, one of the company values was cupcake. And it's not the word cupcake, it's a literal cupcake emoji, but everybody inside of the company knew that it represented our desire to delight customers, whether it was small interactions or large interactions with our brand or our product. And that delivery of delight is what Dropbox found built loyalty and trust with customers. And so for me, that really signaled that it's always important to keep the customer point of view top of mind. And so whether you're developing marketing strategy or messaging or positioning or putting on an event, you need to have a little bit of that cupcake, that customer centricity in the things that you do. And it's the best way to build those long-term relationships.
I love that.
The second piece of that is, you need to be metrics driven. And, it's easy, I think, for marketers to get caught up in thinking about their work in a binary way. Did I launch this product? Did I deliver this campaign? And I think I really learned the value of taking a data-driven approach when I was leading the marketing team at BetterCloud. This experience was unique because we were trying to build this new category that we called SaaS management platforms. And if you ever worked at a company that's trying to create a new product category, it's not easy.
It's very hard.
Yes. And so we knew it was really important to understand what was working and what was not working from a marketing perspective. And so you needed to have really, really strong measurement in place so you could make adjustments quickly. And so I think that experience really helped me appreciate the power of taking a data-driven approach. And so it's something that I've really kind of infused with my marketing teams going forward.
That's amazing.
And then the last one was this concept of strategically aligned. And so my first job, when I kind of transitioned into marketing, I decided to go really big, and I worked up at Microsoft and the Office 365 group. And when I joined, that product had only been in market about 12 months. And so it was really interesting to try to figure out, how do we navigate this transition from, a perpetual license, kind of more on-premise type of solution, to one that was in the cloud. And, we all know Microsoft, it's this big 100,000 person company. And so if you really wanted to get anything done, I learned really quickly that you had to have this buy-in from a bunch of different people. And so while that was challenging, when you had that collaboration and partnership in place, that's when the impact was really, really clear. And so I really push my teams to know who their stakeholders are, make sure that they have open communication and collaboration, and are really making sure that happens not only at the executive level, but at the leadership, kind of director levels down into the IC level. And we all just need to make sure that we're swimming in the same direction. And so I think for me, that's how those companies kind of really influenced how I think about marketing at my core.
Love it. Makes a lot of sense. So I first used Customer IO in 2018 with a client. So I'm curious, how did you first discover Customer IO? And then ultimately, what about the brand drew you into the role of CMO?
Yeah. So fun fact, I was actually a Customer IO customer at Podium, BetterCloud, and Ethos. So three companies I had
Oh,
used this
wow.
platform. So for me, at least, I was able to see the power of the platform pretty clearly through my experience with the solution and my teams working with it. And so when I learned about the opportunity, in some ways, because I had already used it before, I hadn't really dug in, in a couple years as far as what the messaging, the marketing strategy, the positioning they had been using. And so when I saw the marketing and compared it to my own experience, I saw this huge opportunity. For me, I thought they were being way, way too modest and they were really underselling the breadth and depth of the platform. And so that to me was kind of got what got me excited about the opportunity because I saw the potential to come in, refresh the brand, refactor the messaging and positioning, layer in a more sophisticated, demand gen strategy. And I felt really confident that that could really fuel the growth for the business. And I've now been here 2.5 years. And honestly, I'm still motivated by the potential and opportunity that we have. And even though I feel like we've closed that gap in a lot of ways, I still think there's a ton of potential to get more marketing teams leveraging our customer engagement platform.
For sure. And speaking of how we really figure out how to get marketers interested in not just Customer IO, but a platform in general, I initially reached out to you a couple of months ago because I appreciated what your team was doing in reshaping the narrative for what we typically see as very, very boring webinars and, vendor events. For the first time, and I mean this in the best way, it reminded me of the early 2010s where Salesforce had the market. They had the swagger, they had Dreamforce parties, they had golden hoodies, which were such an honor, and lovable mascots like Einstein, my personal favorite. And it made B2B and just really marketing a vendor cool. And what do you think made Salesforce so magnetic? And if we apply that to just Martech in general, like how did we lose that spark culturally?
I kind of saw this firsthand. I was working at Dropbox at the time. And so our I had to pass the Salesforce offices every day. And, one thing that stood out to me was brand marketing was a core part of their strategy. And they were really committed to investing in, honestly, marketing approaches that you would maybe think about being more aligned with B2C companies versus B2B companies. So whether it was the branding or the mascots or the swag, they realized that those activities help build relationships that were not only kind of rational, but also emotional. And I think we forget about the emotional attachment that buyers want to have with brands. And, they were the market leader. They were, one of the first SaaS solutions out there. But as we all know, the market for SaaS solutions just grew exponentially. And I think a lot of marketing leaders realized, hey, the best way for us to compete is actually doing something completely different. We're not going to beat, the Salesforces of the world running that same playbook. And so I think it drove a lot of marketing leaders to become 100% focused on growth. And that made marketing teams more and more focused on efficiency. And so there was less budget for brand focused efforts like, the ones that Salesforce was kind of so known for. And I think that's because it's harder to measure and it's challenging to tie, is this experience that I'm over investing in delivering more leads or more pipeline than a much more kind of traditional approach. And so unfortunately, I think this performance-based mindset kind of killed a lot of investment in experiences that for the vast majority of B2B companies. And so I don't think we have that kind of cultural spark that maybe we once did.
Yeah, I think to your point, if you adopt B2C practices, and also B2C should learn from B2B too. There's so many components that it's really not that different. Yes, have different needs, requirements, but at the same time, we're marketing to people. But you have to remember, of course, there's accounts on the B2B side and there's a little bit more to it. But I agree that we kind of went in the exact opposite. And so are there any companies right now in the MarTech space that you think are channeling the zeitgeist, the energy of the 20 teens?
If I'm really being honest, I don't know. It's hard. The best that I could kind of come up with is, I would say, not, again, traditionally thought of as a MarTech solution, but I mean, I know we use it every day in our marketing team. And so that example would be Figma. I think that they've done some really interesting things with their config conference. I know they have a passionate community of users that advocate really strongly for their product, in a variety of different places. They're not afraid to be a little bit bold in some of the creative approaches they use, and some of the swag that they develop. Maybe it's not to the level of like the mascots that Salesforce have, but it's a more kind of modern flavor. And then, lastly, they have a founder in Dylan that has a really strong vision for the power of design tools. And so I think there's a lot of similarities between, Dylan and Mark, and kind of, having a point of view around your product category and how that's going to evolve and grow and expand. So they're probably, I think, the best example of this ethos today in the kind of B space.
I definitely agree with you. And I would say also maybe Canva in that same kind of vein. They bring a very similar energy in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is about, like, again, design forward companies. I guess the fact that they value that means that it's maybe easier for them to understand the impact of brand investments, and so maybe that's why they're on the kind of bleeding edge of that. But I think it's a lesson that we all can learn from. We think about our own kind of marketing strategies and approaches.
Exactly. And also recognizing its value without needing the performance metrics in the same capacity.
Brought to you by our sponsors. If there's one theme that's followed me at every stop in my Martech career, it's trying to get good data into the hands of marketers. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about our sponsor, HighTouch, the leading composable CDP and AI decisioning platform. Companies like Domino's, Chime, Aritzia, and PetSmart trust HighTouch to power their data. And here's the kicker. 90% of customers have a real use case live in production within their first week. That means you can implement a world-class CDP in months rather than the usual years-long headache. That's why top brands choose HighTouch to personalize every customer interaction at scale. See what HighTouch can do for you at hightouch.com/MSOM. And now back to the hot seat.
All right. So the whole point of this conversation is about making Martech cool again. And I have been genuinely very impressed with what your team has been doing. You originally got me excited with the Bob Ross webinar, because who doesn't love a really fun cultural throwback? It's already been impersonated a few times, I've seen, which is obviously huge kudos to the team who built it. You've also had fun panels, like hot ones. Admittedly, I participated, and I love heat, so I did very well. No one else did. But also, like, recently, writers of the Lost Lifecycle, like, your team is really breaking the mold and like having fun. And I'm curious, like, what is the strategy behind injecting that playfulness, that just a little bit different into the brand experience, but also does this reflect the company culture as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would agree that B2B webinars are pretty predictable today. They're deck heavy, jargon laden, they're forgettable. And I think one thing that I really push my team on is, how can we stand out from the sameness that is commonplace in marketing? And so we've really tried to align around an approach that finds ways to capture and retain attention in some of these saturated marketing channels. So, another way to think about that is like, how can we do something different, in the world of webinar or in-person events? Because we know that when we do that, it generates word of mouth, it generates social sharing, and it drives that kind of emotional side that we referenced earlier. Because in the end, if you can have that emotional recall and the kind of informational recall, like, that's where you get kind of the biggest bang for your buck. And I think what we found is that we can deliver on the performance metric side while also kind of getting these benefits associated with that kind of emotional attachment. I think the second thing that people have to understand is that great experience creates great content flywheels. So what I mean by that is that in addition to the benefit that you get in the marketing leading up to the event, you also get it in all the follow-up that you do afterwards. And it gives you this unique hook that you can lean into. And so you can actually create these moments, in multiple situations and multiple channels, just through one really solid creative idea. And then the last thing is that, we believe we're building a brand that is going to create a future moat for our products. Because, the MarTech space, there's a lot of companies that are out there, and you could probably point to solutions that do aspects of what our platform does. And, we believe that we provide a really great product, but we also know that buyers want to be associated with companies that stand out and appeal to some of their unique points of view and bring them delight when they're engaging with brands. And so we believe that this is a competitive advantage that's actually defensible against other competitors that are out there.
I definitely agree. And I think a lot of companies could take note, and I mean, they already kind of are, but really move beyond the sales pitch webinar. No one wants it. No one wants to even do it when you're on the inside. And so, of course, your team's been doing really fascinating and playful, creative events. I guess from these events in general, just activations in person, like what are you learning that today's customers really want?
Yeah, I think that people are honestly just tired of the old traditional marketing approaches that have maybe been associated with SaaS in the past. And so, if you really want to drive action, you're going to need to do things that surprise or delight them. I also think that audiences care not only about what you said, but also how you make them feel. And so, by creating these moments of joy, curiosity, laughter, you kind of tap into some of those emotional triggers that make your brand more memorable to them. And so I think these are some of the feedback and insights that we've generated through the examples that you shared earlier. And I think that's kind of motivating us and pushing us to think outside the box in other ways, in other channels. Honestly, the team loves it. I mean, it's more exciting to go into work when you're able to make it different versus it's not a process. It's not a repeatable pattern that drives their kind of day to day anymore. And so I think there's honestly some halo impacts that come back to the overall kind of attitudes and perception of the team themselves as far as how they think about their kind of day to day efforts.
Agreed. And something I am envious of folks on vendor side is you get to market to marketers. Like that is the dream job because they know what is and isn't working. They understand the strategy, the playbook. So that just means it's like that much more high stakes. And how do you structure your team to keep things both creative without losing speed or scale, but also keep it interesting to probably the most difficult audience?
Yeah, I mean, when you're marketing to marketers, they can see through the fluff or see through the kind of traditional things that maybe a non-marketer might miss. And so some of the ways in which I've tried to foster a creative experience for the team while balancing the need to move fast and scale. The first one is really having them stay focused on outcomes versus being overly prescriptive on what you want to do. And when you give teams autonomy to come up with new ideas versus feeling like, hey, I'm just running the CMO's playbook in their head, like that's when the great ideas kind of come out. I think the second thing is you need to be clear on the ways that you're going to measure success. So also too, where to double down or pivot because a lot of times, right, you with these efforts, you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And sometimes you might, perceive that something doesn't work, but the data we found actually kind of validates that it was a successful effort or initiative. And so this is again going back to that earlier theme of data-driven decision making. Like I really push the team to leverage that because it really helps them determine where they need to do more or where they need to pivot to something new. And then the last piece of the puzzle, I think, is realizing that collaboration is key, since the best ideas likely require multiple teams across marketing to be successful. So, you referenced earlier our kind of Indiana Jones theme webinar that we just had. That idea came from demand gen, but I would argue that it wouldn't have been as successful if we didn't have this amazing creative execution from the brand studio team. And so it's a good reminder that, a good idea is only a good idea if it is actually brought to life in a successful way. And so I'm really proud of how well the team collaborates and communicates to really bring to life some of these out of the box initiatives that we found a lot of success with.
I love that. And as we've been talking about all these different types of events and ways to engage, do you think overall for the greater industry that more vendors should host conferences, festivals, themed user experiences, or activations and events the answer, or is it a larger, broader conversation?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. One thing that I think people have to remember is that in-person events drive deeper trust. If you think about how we interact with a lot of brands today, in a lot of cases, it's remote first, it's kind of digitally noisy. And so these in-person moments are now these premium ways that in which you can build relationships, and you can't really replicate that through the other marketing channels that you might have set up today. Additionally, again, it goes back to this kind of retention point, but people are more likely to remember the experiences that they have versus the nuts and bolts of the content that you're creating. And so it's important that you keep that impact in mind, because brand recall is half the battle, especially in the Martech world where, there's literally hundreds, thousands, maybe thousands of applications, you could argue, that are trying to capture a portion of a marketing team's budget. And so having that higher kind of brand recall because of a great experience is something that I think a lot of people can use to justify investments in these conferences or themed user experiences or whatever you feel like is going to kind of break through the noise and bring people together in person.
Yeah, the breaking through the noise is so difficult when there's over 15,000 Martech vendors in the entire space. And that's technically a contraction compared to last year in terms of the number of companies that went away. Granted, new companies came on board. Thank you, Scott Brinker, for the information. But at the same time, that's a lot of things to wade through, both as a customer, as an audience, as a marketer. And so I'm curious, like we've alluded to what Salesforce they did as a playbook. Do we think mascots, maybe memes now, influencers, since those are newer concepts compared to where we were at 15 years ago, let's be honest. Do you think those things would potentially help Martech borrow that kind of fun zeitgeist of consumer fandom dynamics?
I'm optimistic. And to be fair, I think we're doing some experimentation, at least with the meme side and the influencer marketing side. I think that the things that drew us to kind of memes are they're low cost and they can be really high impact. But you gotta get them right. I think they have to be authentic. They have to demonstrate that you have this kind of shared worldview and you understand kind of the marketplace and kind of where your brand fits in. And then on the influencer side, I think the things that are most attractive to me is, you can get this social proof at scale. And the other thing to remember is that B2B buying is heavily peer influence. So if you can get these respective voices advocating for your product, it adds a ton of credibility really, really fast. And then, having an influencer also unlocks so many different tactics. So you might start with a blog post, but that could lead to podcast or various collabs, between your different audiences, AMAs, and these things are evergreen in nature. And so those, I think, are some of the aspects of those different tactics that I think are really appealing and could be a good way to learn from some of the successes that we saw from that kind of Salesforce era.
For sure. I'll just say, take that, Magic Quadrant and Forrester Wave. I think if we're talking about what it used to be like, that was probably the singular most helpful, boring metric. And I think there's a lot more to it now.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We ask everyone at the very end, who is someone else we should have on the podcast?
I've been lucky enough to have some really strong interactions with Tara Robertson. So she's the CMO at Bitly. We share an investor. And so that's kind of created some opportunities to bounce ideas off each other. And I found her extremely thoughtful around marketing strategy development. I think she's pushing thought leadership around AI and the impacts that it has on the go-to-market effort. So I think she'd be a really great guest.
Well, I'll take you up on that offer. Thank you so much, Jason, for being here. Where can folks find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on X. My handle is just my name, Jason Lyman. And yeah, I'd love to connect.
Awesome.